Here we go. Everything you got to know about 1984, Part 3, Chapter 3. Winston, he's again strapped to the board, but not as tightly. He can move a little bit, so some time has passed. O'Brien tells him that there are 3 stages to his program: learning, understanding, and acceptance, and Winston's in stage 2. Apparently, Winston can get through entire sessions without getting zapped by the dial now, as long as he doesn't say anything stupid, according to O'Brien. So O'Brien brings up how Winston wrote in the diary that he can grasp how the party does what it does, but that he doesn't get the why of it. What motivates the party? O'Brien asks if Goldstein's book really told Winston anything he didn't already know. Winston, of course, asks O'Brien, "Did you read it?" And O'Brien admits that he actually helped write it, and that as a description in terms of how society is structured, it is true, but where it gives any credit to the proles actually rising up against the party is total fiction, it's total nonsense. O'Brien tells Winston the party will never, ever, 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 ever be defeated. So O'Brien continues, restating that Winston knows how the party keeps power, but wants to really get at the why they do it. So in Winston's brain, he reflects on how he thinks O'Brien's going to say the party, even with its horrible, harsh methods, is ultimately doing what's best for mankind. Man is too weak and must be ruled over by the powerful who know what's best for them. Winston thinks that O'Brien and the party believe the evil that they're doing is eventually producing or going to produce good. So finally, Winston answers that the party is in power for the good of the people, and he's immediately zapped by the dial. So O'Brien tells Winston that his answer was stupid, telling Winston that the party wants power just to have power, not for people's good or money or happiness, just power. O'Brien makes the distinction between the party and other tyrannies like the Nazis or communists who fooled themselves that they had power as a part of this process of bringing their own utopia to the world. Even though it wasn't true, the party doesn't pretend like these past dictatorships did. They go after power because they want power. So the reason for torture is torture, and the reason for persecution is persecution, because both of those things are about power. Looking at him, Winston notices how tired and old O'Brien's face looks. O'Brien seems to know this is what Winston is thinking, and says that the age of the individual is not relevant because the individual is actually part of the whole, the collective of the party. An individual's power is limited, but as part of the whole, any individual lives forever. Another point about power that O'Brien makes to Winston is that power is power over people, over body and mind. He tells Winston that the party has power over both of these things, so the party has power over matter. So Winston, right, you can't help but protest, like, this is crazy, saying you don't have control over weather or gravity or disease. But O'Brien comes back at him and says, you know what, if we control the mind, then we control all of those things because reality is only in the mind. O'Brien tells Winston that O'Brien could float up off the floor if the party wanted him to, and if he wanted to, which they don't, but they make the laws of nature, so he could do it. Of course, again, this is crazy to Winston. He tries to come back at O'Brien, talking about what about fossils and the age of the earth and the distance of the stars. But O'Brien, one by one, dismisses all of these arguments. The basic idea is that the party adjusts reality to suit its own purposes. So they could just as easily reach out and grab the stars, or they could make them not exist, whatever is convenient for the reality that they need. O'Brien reminds Winston of doublethink. They warp reality to however they want it. Basically, O'Brien is smarter than Winston. He can think circles around him. Winston thinks he knows that a reality exists beyond his own mind, but he doesn't know how to explain that or prove that. O'Brien concludes, the real power is power over people, and again asks, why does the party do that? Winston answers by making people suffer. They have power over people by making them suffer. O'Brien actually agrees with this, goes off on this idea, saying, we're creating the opposite of a typical utopia. We're breaking down human emotions, human relationships and human thought. The party is making a miserable world based on hate and suffering, where the only love is the love for Big Brother, and any joy is only the joy over an enemy that's to be defeated, right? Winston is like freaked out and frozen. O'Brien sums up the future this way. It's a boot stomping on a human face until the end of time. And O'Brien says again and again, and it's forever. There's always going to be an enemy to be defeated. Everything that happened to Winston is going to happen to somebody else, but even more intensely. The party gets more merciless the more power it has, and Winston is going to come to accept it and be a part of it. Winston finally has the voice to protest, right? Saying, you can't do this, you're going to fail, that such a world is going to just implode or explode, it can't sustain itself. O'Brien says there's no evidence for that, and there's no reason for you to say that, and that the party is immortal, and that the party controls life. Even the proles are more like animals, and they are a lost cause. But Winston's like, something will defeat you. Finally saying, you know what's going to defeat you? The spirit of man. So O'Brien asks Winston if he thinks he's a man, and if he thinks he's morally superior than the party. Well, Winston says, yes, I'm a man, and yes, I'm morally superior. So O'Brien tells him, if you are a man, you're the last one, and you're all alone. And to prove his point, he plays the recording of all of the horrible things that Winston and Julia promised to do to overthrow the party. Murder, throwing acid in a kid's face, spreading disease. O'Brien just allows the recording to defeat Winston's assertion that he's any better than they are. Then O'Brien has Winston get up, get undressed, and come stand in front of this three-way mirror. Just approaching the mirror, Winston is scared because he sees this skeleton-like gray monster coming towards him, and he realizes it's actually him. Winston is a complete wreck of gray skin, scars, bones sticking out everywhere with this horrible curved spine. He thinks he looks over 60 with a horrible disease. O'Brien points out his condition, that he smells, that he can break his neck with his hand if he wanted to. He can put his finger around his bicep. His hair is falling out. O'Brien just reaches into his mouth and pulls out one of his front teeth because his teeth are falling out. Having Winston look in the mirror again, he tells him that's what the last man looks like. So Winston, of course, sees that he's destroyed, starts to weep at this. And O'Brien says, Winston, this is your own fault. Winston tries to blame O'Brien, but O'Brien puts it back on him, saying, you set this in motion when you first started opposing the party. O'Brien says they have beaten him, but Winston actually says that he hasn't betrayed Julia. And you know what? O'Brien actually gives him that. You haven't actually betrayed Julia. Now, Winston's confessed every single thing about her, but he means that he hasn't emotionally betrayed her, that he loves her. Winston admires O'Brien for understanding what he meant, and the chapter ends with Winston asking when he's going to be shot. O'Brien tells him that he's a tough one, but everyone is eventually cured, and he will also be cured, and at some point, he's going to be shot. So, what do we take from this chapter? Again, this chapter is Orwell stripping away the pretense of tyrannies in history to reveal what they're really about: power and oppression. O'Brien's explanation that earlier totalitarian regimes pretended to have noble goals, that, temporarily they would be persecuting and torturing and oppressing, but the big important reason was they were going to bring about a better world, their own view of a better world. But if they did have victory, they would actually not relinquish their power. Through O'Brien, Orwell reveals what any communist or dictatorial government is really about at its core: power. Their concern isn't about making life better for others, just better for themselves. Anything that is a potential threat against that power and control must be destroyed. Orwell is following the direction of these kinds of governments to the conclusion of the path that they're on, if anything stands in their way. Orwell also seems to reach the conclusion that ultimately these leaders are insane and create or see their own reality that they want to impose upon the world at all costs. Other perspectives don't make logical sense or are not the right way of seeing things to these kinds of, despots and tyrannical leaders. So they have to be destroyed or conformed to their way of thinking. How else can we explain, like a Hitler or a Mussolini or a Stalin, except that they are madmen who were bent on bringing the world under their warped and obviously evil vision for society. This is Orwell, his world he's seeing around him. Winston's reaction of horror and protest is natural in the face of this morally bankrupt desire for power. So hopefully that's helpful for this chapter. It's a tough one. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. Thank you for watching. Would love it if you would subscribe or share, maybe even like if you're in the mood. All right, until next time, we'll see you then.